All right. Welcome to another Bright News discussion. My name is Shannon Braswell. Y'all already know that. And I'm here with good buddies of mine, man. Here with my neighbor and my walking buddy, Bob Collins.
Hi.
And my Florida brother from another mother, Shane Kennedy. How y'all doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting over a cold. You know what I'm saying? So pardon me if I be coughing and stuff like that. I might have to, you know what I mean? But we're here and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to you guys for showing up, man, and taking the time to talk with me. So for starters, I want to introduce Bob, and I want to let Bob talk about, just introduce himself. So Bob, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing good. So my name's Bob Collins, as Shannon had mentioned. I have been living in Washington for about 3 years. I retired about 3 years ago. I worked real hard to get to this retirement. It didn't stick in the beginning, but it is now. Spend most of my time taking care of my 84-year-old mother. So she lives here with me. And any other time I have free, I try and get out on the road. I'm a new motorcycle rider. Started riding motorcycles about 1.5 years ago. I've got 28,000 miles on 2 different bikes now. I did 18,000 miles last year with a 12-state solo tour. That was phenomenal. Let's see. I don't know. Former Marine, researcher, and extraordinary talent. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, no. Let's talk about your time in the military and when that was, because me and Shane, you're a millennial, right?
Yep.
You're a millennial.
Born in 1987. Yeah.
1987. Okay. I was 89. So now Bob.
So the year that you were born, Shannon, the year that you were born is the year that I joined the Marine Corps. So depending on what month you were born, we might share some anniversaries together.
Yeah. I was born in March.
That's amazing.
I went to boot camp in March. I left for a boot camp in March. I graduated June 2nd of 1989.
Wow.
Okay. So I left for boot camp March 3rd or March 4th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And now I want to know what was that like, and that whole experience, and then maybe you could take us into I believe the Gulf War started around that time.
Yeah, so the Gulf War's the big conflict that happened when I was in. We also had a conflict called Operation Just Cause in the end of '89.
Okay.
So I wasn't a part of that, but that was happening when I was in the service. So in just to back up, just to give an idea, when I was very young, 10 or 11, this is back when all television was, broadcast, and you had these antenna rabbit ears that you had to adjust. For those of you that might remember that, I was watching a movie. I believe it was on PBS. It was about Marines. I don't remember much. I've tried to go back to find that old documentary, all that movie, and I can't. So this is probably a lot of false memory that I'm remembering. Maybe it's a little glorified in my own head. But what I remember was seeing this military on the screen, and me turning. I remember clearly my mom ironing. I remember clearly turning to her while she was ironing and asking her, "Who are they?" And she said, "Well, those are the Marines." And I said, "That's what I'm going to do." And everybody laughed. They just thought it was ridiculous. I was the most undisciplined, awful child you can possibly imagine. I'm the fifth of five. By the time I came along, my parents were tired of parenting. They were just like, he's not killing himself and he's not burning down the house. Just let him do whatever he wants. That was the attitude. And back in the mid 80s, my folks were divorced. Mom had to work, so I became a latchkey kid. I would come home if I went to school in high school. That's the way it was. There were times I'd wake up in the morning and Mom would open the door and she'd stick her head in and say, "Are you going to school today?" And I'd look at her and go, "Nope." And she'd go, "Okay." Because her option was to stay at home and discipline me and then have the bills pile up, or do her responsibility and go to work. The flip side of that was I wasn't involved in drugs. I didn't believe in any kind of drugs. I enjoy a little bit of marijuana now, but it's legal. I was as square as they came as a kid. I smoked cigarettes because it was the 80s. But I didn't drink. I wasn't interested in drugs. I didn't hang around troublemakers. All my friends were closeted nerds. We all played Dungeons and Dragons, and we were interested in military stuff, and that's pretty much that. So my best friend in high school, Mike, sort of my mentor, kind of a brother figure, he joined the Marine Corps about 2 years before me.
Okay.
And he went off and he only told us good stuff. He never complained. He never would come back and bitch and moan about this or that. He was a trooper the whole way through. And that only inspired more confidence and more desire to join. In our little group, we had a little group. Most of us joined the military at one point or another. He and I were the only two that joined the Marine Corps. So I went in the Marine Corps with the intention of being a Marine, but also with the intention of wanting to play for 4 years. Okay. I didn't have career goals or any kind of I had no clue on what I was doing in my life. So I joined the Marine Corps. I went into the infantry. I was put into TOWS, which is an anti-tank missile system. If you remember any footage from the Gulf War, it looked kind of like a cannon sitting on top of a Humvee. It wasn't. Okay. It was a missile, but that's what it kind of looked like. The weapon system kind of looked like a cannon sitting on top of a Humvee. Yeah. And it was a good job, because I got all the infantry, all the cool infantry training. I was eligible for specialty training, anything that I could manage to finagle my way into, going through Scout Sniper School. So at that time, there was a small school. I don't believe it was the official Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. It was just a Scout Sniper School. And while I wasn't a scout or a sniper, because they always had spots to fill, we could go get into those classes to fill those classes. So I got a lot of specialty training that just wasn't necessarily available to a lot of people, because I was stationed on Okinawa for my first duty station. And for anyone that might remember, or anyone that's been on Okinawa, it's this very small island, very few bases. I was in the worst base, but it turned out to be a great opportunity, because I loved those schools and I loved that training. Jungle environmental survival training, winter warfare survival training. Those things were intense, but they were really, really fun. Yeah. So that's why I joined the Marine Corps, and that's how I ended up as a anti-tank missileman. I did my first year in Okinawa, and then I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and that's where we deployed to the first Gulf War. And we left at the end of 1990. I know that we arrived in Saudi Arabia I know that we were there on New Year's, because our Gunnery Sergeant Brown, he had this, and I won't go through the whole speech now. I remember most of it. It's not really, these are a series of words that most people don't want to hear strung together, but he would get up and he would make this little speech, hey, what did he say? He would say, and pardon me, I'll edit what I can, but he'd say, don't piss in a bottle crooked, don't mess with big women, and don't F it up. And that's how he ended every every speech that he gave, any security speech, any safety speech. And I remember on New Year's Eve, I don't think any of us realized that it was New Year's Eve where we were. We'd been traveling for 18 or 20 hours. So he gathers us all together and he says, okay, don't piss in a bottle crooked. Don't mess with heavy women. He used other words. Welcome to Saudi Arabia. Don't fuck it up. Oh, I purposely tried not to say that.
It's all right. It's all right.
For the record, you meant PHUCK, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Right.
So yeah, that was a very interesting and scary time for us. Combat zone. Granted, our war was a lot shorter. Shannon and I were talking a little bit about that earlier. The war was intense. We had 2 full days where we were in chemical warfare gear, and you can't imagine what that's like. I mean, that's a gas mask over your head for 2 days straight. It's these heavy carbon-filled layers of clothing that are put on top with these big thick rubber gloves. Everything's duct tape and sealed. There's no way to relieve yourself. You just stay in your suit. So for the 2 days that we were in those, you just relieve yourself in your suit and you walk around in slosh. It was pretty intense. That was the hardest part about it. But man, I was young. I believed I was invincible. I'm still kind of on that track. I'm still pretty sure I'm invincible. But young and dumb and all the things that go along with that. Programmed, programmed with the 80s and the whole Cold War mentality that was drilled into us going through school. Love your country first, and that carried that right into the Marine Corps. And then of course you're indoctrinated into the Marine Corps. And I use that word specifically because it is an indoctrination. It is a way to change the mental thought process of the people that are coming in. And you need that, because if you don't do that, then you don't have good warriors. And you need every country, our country needs good warriors. Not that we necessarily need to send them out, but we need to have them in case we need them. So I'm not necessarily a proponent of going to war. I'm definitely a proponent of being prepared for war. Because the world is a chaotic place, and as we've seen in the past 20 years, we've seen the rise and fall of a lot of different countries, and the expansion of the internet, the expansion of individual knowledge of what's going around the world. It's important. It's important to have a strong military defense. Personal opinion. I realize that there's a lot that would disagree with me, but I don't want to live under the rule of another country.
Right.
I like the way our country's set up. It's not perfect. I've got my own complaints about that, as we all do. But it's as close to being free as I think you can possibly be in this world right now.
Yes.
Hey man, I'll tell you something. A lot of people. Well, I'll say this, as far as being a Black American, right? A lot of Black Americans, they got this idea that, and I told you about this, Bob, before we got on here. I said, see, a lot of Black Americans, we have this idea that, if we go back to Africa, you know what I'm saying? We'll see the motherland. We'll get back to our roots. You know what I'm saying? We'll be able to get back to our ancestral worship and religion and stuff like that. And I always tell them, I say, man, I ain't going back to no Africa. Okay, it ain't happening, brother. I was born in this country. This is my country. And Black Americans, we've been in this country since its foundation. I ain't going nowhere, man. You know, all this stuff about you know, going back to Africa and I tell, you know, and I tell them about, you know, there's this guy, I don't know if you guys know him, named Umar Johnson. You know, he's like a Afro, what do they call it? Afrocentrist. You know,
Afrocentric.
Yeah, Afrocentric. You know what I'm saying? And I said, man, look, that's cool, man. You know, I don't got no problem with you know, African women. You know what I'm saying? You know, they're beautiful, but I'm not gonna live there. You understand what I'm saying? Because that's not my home. You understand what I'm saying? And I think people, a lot of times, you know, Americans, we have this mentality that like, you know, we think, well, you know, everything about this country is wrong. You know what I'm saying? Everything that is here is a problem, whatever. You know, I agree that, like, okay, America's got issues, man. You know what I'm saying? But that's every country. Okay. But where would you rather live? You can't speak freely nowhere else. If I said the shit that I said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say shit. But if I said the shit that I said in Nigeria, you know what I'm saying? Or said stuff in Saudi Arabia or whatever, dude, we all know what's gonna happen. Say something about the king in Thailand. You know what's gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? You going to jail. And that's the bottom line. There ain't no putting nothing. You know what I'm saying? Ain't no limits on that. You know what I'm saying? This is the only country where you can actually speak freely and say how you really feel. You know what I'm saying? Well,
sort of.
Yeah, sort of. You know what I'm saying? You know,
there's a powerful force out there that's trying to stop us from being able to say what we want.
Yeah.
You know, if I would have said, maybe if I would have said all this stuff maybe 2 months ago, you know, they would have banned this whole YouTube, this whole Zoom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I'm glad, you know what I'm saying, and I thank God that, you know, I'm grateful. That's what I'll say. You know what I'm saying? I'm grateful because this is my country. You know what I'm saying? And I you know, we don't got nowhere else to go, man. You know what I'm saying? And we should be thankful for that. You know what I mean? That we have the liberty, you know what I mean, to express the things we want to express. You know what I'm saying?
You know, Shannon, when I was in the Marine Corps, I visited 44 different countries, 44 distinct countries, not just touch and goes, 44 countries where I was in the country and had a chance to interact with the people.
Yeah.
And honestly, now, you know, as a almost 55-year-old man, I have no desire, none whatsoever, to go to any other countries. None. I've got friends that talk about, you know, hey, let's maybe do Europe, or, you know, that I'm into motorcycling. And they're like, hey, let's go maybe do this over here. And I'm like, I have no interest. I have no interest in going up to Canada. I have no interest in visiting Mexico. And it's nothing against Canada or Mexico or EU or Japan or Okinawa or any country. I just, once I've seen all of my country, then maybe I'll be open to visit another one. But here, I know what I have coming, and I know what I know what to expect. And in other countries, I don't. And I like the freedoms and the liberties and what our Constitution allows me to do here.
Yeah. Amen. Yes, Lord.
Don't you think that that America is. I know that I know this is something a lot of people say, but America is really grounded on, or the kind of like the cohesive principle of America is it's kind of like a set of ideas and a set of values rather than ethnicity. You know,
Oh,
when
yeah.
when you go around the world, like take Japan for instance. You know, the Japanese feel very strongly about about ethnic cohesion as being the most important principle of their culture. But in America, that is not now. Not everybody in America feels that way, but I'd say most people in America would agree that kind of the core principle of the country is not it is not based on ethnic cohesion. It's based upon kind of like I guess uh, uh maybe ideological cohesion, in the sense like we talked about freedom of speech, right? Like that's one of the core principles that we would all say that we all have to we all have to agree on. That's why it's so important that freedom of speech, the definition of it, is so widely accepted, and there's a consensus on it, because that's one of the principles that everybody needs to agree on in order for our country to remain cohesive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's I think of it more. I mean, ideological is fine, but I think more of it is as being the American culture.
Yes.
And the American culture is the principles that were set forth in the Constitution. And everybody that lives here and everybody that's a citizen, I'm willing to bet that everyone that's here that's not a citizen, that's either in the process of becoming a citizen or is that maybe that is here outside of papers. I think the reason that people are here is because of those fundamental cultural concepts that we have. They're looking for that. And while certain more extreme groups, they want to use these same cultural ideals to silence other people, they don't really get the concept, but they're still in support for their own aspect. I mean, we see internally, we see from an internal locus looking out, and everybody feels that, like, I have a right to say this, and I have a right to be happy, and I have a right to live, my life, have my liberty. Even though a lot of people are completely deranged and are using that exact concept to try and quash the ideas of others.
Right.
That's where we're not perfect. But yeah, that's one thing that I have noticed is and to be fair, I haven't traveled to another country in 35 years. But what I have seen in all the other countries that I've been to is that they are ethnic centric, where we are more cultural centric.
Yeah.
Or as Shane had said earlier, ideologically centric.
Yeah.
And when I say ideological, the only thing I mean is kind of like adherence to a set of ideas.
That's the meaning of the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not putting in an idea. You're not suggesting an ideology. You're just saying that that's the way we're based. And you're right. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and also too, it's interesting the way that we frame, like when you look at the Bill of Rights, for instance, the way everything is framed, they're all framed in negative rights. Where it's the sense that these are things that the government can't do. So it kind of leaves the wiggle room up to the communities,
right?
And it leaves the wiggle room up to people to determine, well, what ought I do? Yeah, and then that's where it's really interesting when you look at, especially in the mid 1800s and all the way into the early 20th century, when you had really mass migration into the country. A lot of our ancestors ended up coming. I'm talking about the Irish in particular, because the British starved them off of their land. They ended up coming and they ended up bounding together, and you had a lot of Irish. You had a lot of Irish neighborhoods in New York and in Boston, in Pennsylvania and all kinds of places, Michigan, and they all had a sense of this is the way we ought to live, you know, and that might be a different sensibility from Italians or from kind of like the WASP elite that were descended from the Pilgrims, you know, that the Congregationalists up in New England. And it's really interesting how the government's, how the kind of like the baseline rights that we're all supposed to agree on, they're all written in the negative sense, that Congress shall pass no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, you know, like
Right.
And that the government doesn't have the right to limit speech. But then that allows the communities to construct, well, this is what you need to do in your life, this is what you ought to do. And it almost seems like we're living in a time right now, and I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in as to the time and place we're living in now, where it seems like the past couple of generations have rejected the notion that they have a responsibility to pass on this is the way you ought to live. So now you have a lot of people that are just very confused.
Yeah.
Just to put it lightly, you know, they're like living experiments to try to determine what are the limits to liberty, you know, and stuff like that. And then you end up having people that dress up in animal costumes and bark at ground beef in the grocery store, you know. Yeah, you know, and
that would be a great day. I would
no
love
judgment,
to see that.
you know.
Don't judge me.
Yeah.
Oh no, Bob,
no
it's
judgment.
real, bro. Hey, we got them types. We got them types here, man. You know what I'm saying? You know, I tell Shane all the time. I say, man, Seattle. You know, we got a lot of freedom in this state.
Yeah.
But we got a lot of freedom. You know what I'm saying? That's like
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say, like the shit that goes on here, man. You know, you be thinking to yourself, like, dude, what is happening? You know what I'm saying? The people walking around here and stuff, you be like, you know, okay, so because you're in the military, because you were former military, I'll say this. If I was former military, bro, I'll be like, man, if it was World War II or World War I, I would have said, did I go to war for this?
Well, here's
this is rhetoric.
now I can't speak for any of my buddies, and I keep in touch with maybe about half a dozen. Maybe it's not even that anymore. I have one friend that he's very liberal. He's more liberal than I'm comfortable with. I used to consider myself a liberal, but in this day and age, I don't think I qualify for that anymore. I believe you can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can associate and think of yourself however you want.
Yeah.
That's all fine. You do you. If you're not harming other people, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a structured religious, in particular Christian background behind me. We were raised with the fundamentals of Christianity without Christianity being introduced into the house. You know, you follow these tenets, but we weren't required. We didn't go to church, and we didn't pray before we ate. I understand all those concepts because we were educated to understand those concepts. My dad had his own thought process. My mom had her own thought process. That being said, I'm okay with you doing whatever you want. If you're not hurting anybody, then do whatever you want. That's why I volunteered to fight for this country. I fought for this country so you can say all the stupid shit that you want to say.
Yeah.
And whether I agree with you or I don't, that's perfectly fine. Whether you're a Trump lover or a Harris lover, I don't care. I have my own opinions. Most of the time I keep them to myself. I try really hard politically and religiously to keep my own opinions to myself. I'm not always great at it.
I'm not great at that at all.
I was raised by a man that I now consider borderline misogynist.
Mhm.
I didn't see it when I was a kid because, you know, that was just my dad. But I look back on some of the things that he said, some of his attitudes. He used to, I'll give an example. Like, don't get me wrong. I love my father. He passed away about 7 years ago. I
I'm
love
sorry to hear that.
he was old. It's what happens when people get old.
Yeah.
It's just it's part of life. Thank you for that, by the way. It's not, instead of me just brushing it off, but
Yeah, no.
he used to cut my mother-in-law off all the time. And at first I didn't really recognize what he was doing. I knew that when we were in a setting like this, right when I first got married, I knew that my dad did things that made me uncomfortable and left expressions on people's faces that I didn't like. And my wife and I had just gotten married. I'm long divorced, but we had just gotten married, living in our new condo, had everyone over to kind of visit. I'm not sure if we were celebrating our wedding or if we were celebrating the official purchase of our condo or what we were celebrating, but we had family members over. And at this time, I was a cigarette smoker, as were my in-laws and my parents. We were standing out on the balcony and we were having a cigarette. And I was talking with my mother-in-law, Faye, and she was, you know, talking about whatever she was talking about. And my dad came out and cut her off like what she had to say didn't matter. And that was the first time. It's the first time that I remember confronting my father in an adult way, where I stopped and I looked at him and I said, Dad, you rudely cut off Faye, and I won't have that kind of behavior in my home. So you can either apologize or you can leave. And it's one of the reasons that my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law, kept in touch with me after we were married, or after we were divorced, is because of that sense of me realizing that there was something wrong in my dad's general attitude. And you know, he was raised in the 50s. He's a white man that was raised in the 50s. So he's going to think like a white man that was raised in the 50s. There's no way he's going to be culturally aware, because they just weren't. So I don't hold it against him, but it was the first time that I realized that my particular set of values and how I want to treat people didn't align with the way that my father's values were. And you know, his dad was worse. To be fair, my dad is a first generation American, second generation.
Oh, okay.
No, he's first. My dad is first generation American. He was born in the United States, but my grandfather was born in Canada, which is where my dad's a lineage comes from. And so I get it. I mean, just a couple of generations before that, they were like merchant marines out of Nova Scotia, like working the hardest life you can possibly imagine. And I understand the mentality, but I wasn't gonna have it. That's the extent of as far as that liberal aspect goes. You know, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Everyone's entitled to speak. And I'm not gonna have somebody quash somebody else's right or walk all over them, especially in the case of at the time, I still saw women much in the aspect that my father did without realizing, and I still saw them as more of a weaker, I don't want to say a weaker sex, but a weaker form of our species, and not just physically, but also all the women that were in my life, they all acquiesced to the men in their lives, which is one of the reasons that my marriage turned out so bad, because my wife wasn't raised that way and didn't have that aspect. So we very quickly started realizing that we were not emotionally mature enough. I don't know if she would agree with this or not, but we were not emotionally mature enough or old enough to really have that kind of relationship. That was a lot. I just gave you a whole lot of stuff.
well, so something I want to ask you is, do you think, you know, you're someone that comes from a your father's side of the family are Irish Americans, right?
Collins, yeah. Oh, yeah. There
Or
is Irish on both sides. So
okay,
my mom's family is Scott Irish. My
okay.
dad's family has Irish in it. Yeah.
So that's double the trauma then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so like the thing I want to ask you is, do you think that just kind of like stepping back and looking at kind of like the big picture, I've thought about this a lot, is a lot of the Irish, when they came to America, they weren't coming here, they weren't coming here because it was just an option to get a better deal or something. A lot of them were coming here to be able to live, to be able to escape poverty. And like you, my father's side of the family came to Canada first, and then they came to America. So do you think that generation that your dad was a part of, that there was a lot of trauma that that got stirred into the mix in his father's and grandfather's generation, that kind of trickled down to him? You
Um,
know, because I can definitely say that I think that happened within my own family, where my dad's dad, my grandfather, I never met him because he died of cirrhosis, from alcoholism.
yeah.
And I thought a lot about how, you know people of Irish backgrounds, they're great at shit talking, or I shouldn't have said that, but
Well,
you know
we've already cracked the seal on that
yeah,
one.
yeah. The seal's broken, and you know, bust out the bottle, but
Yeah.
the thing is, I guess the Irish are really good, or people of Irish backgrounds are really, really good at gossiping, and kind of like doing a whole character assassination on people. And I think it's really easy for people of my generation now to look back at my grandfather's generation and his parents' generation and say, yeah, they were just terrible people or whatever, alcoholism, womanizing, and everything like that. And those are horrible things that shouldn't have happened. But I guess the thing I've been coming back to in my mind is, I wonder if that was the manifestation of internalized trauma from that got brought into my family, and that was
Okay.
probably brought into yours, from being starved off their land in Ireland, and then experiencing the whole industrial revolution thing, where the only way for them to get work would have been to go and work at a factory for like 12 or 14 hours or something like that, when a few generations before, they would have lived in a village that their families would have lived in for hundreds or even like 1,000 years,
Right.
where everybody knew each other, everybody kind of lived in the same places. And there was like the local pub where everybody knew each other. There was a whole embedded community that would of women that would all stand in solidarity with one another, a whole community of men that would stand in solidarity with one another. Everybody's families knew one another. So they didn't go somewhere and experience trauma and then on top of it be strangers in a foreign land. So, and I kind of wonder if a lot of our families that had horror stories that they dealt with in like the early and mid and even late 20th century, if a lot of that is, if those are like kinks that had to kind of work themselves out of our familial chains.
Yeah. I maybe. So in the case of my father, we weren't close,
Okay.
and he died of dementia, or
Mm.
Alzheimer's, I guess is what it ended up turning to. But for the last 5 years that he was alive, he I didn't even have a conversation with him for probably the last four. The last time I spoke with him was about 5 years before he died, and he was in that position where he just kind of kept repeating the same couple of stories over and over again. So we weren't close. I don't know a lot about him growing up. Taking care of my mother, on the other hand, I've made it a point to sit down and discuss with her life, and there's a comedian, Louis C.K.,
Yeah.
and if you're familiar with him, he's got a whole skit on his mother, and things that you don't really know about your mother. In fact, Tom Segura, I'm a big comedian fan. Tom Segura's got a good one too, where you don't really know what your parents were like, and I work really hard to sit. I tried to get my mom to record these stories, but she's not having any of that. But what I do is I ask her about her life, you know, her early boyfriends and what dating was like, and things like that. And because we live in a closed environment, I'm still gaining skills from her. You know, I'm a pretty decent cook on my own. I can run a household on my own, but you know, she's still got tricks up her sleeve. I still find myself going in and being like, okay, I can cook a steak. I can make stir fry. I can make I can make, you know, complicated souffles. I can do all that. But then I still walk into her and be like, how do I cook rice again? So it's one of those things. I ask her about questions, and she was in the hospital about 8 months ago. We thought we were going to lose her. And mentally, we had kind of for a little while. It's a hospital dementia thing that happens for elderly patients.
Okay.
But when she came back, I realized, okay, now's my opportunity to get to know my mother in a way that most people will never get to know their mothers. So now we have conversations that are more akin to what you would have with a friend than maybe a parent son, child conversation. And what I learned about my mom's growing up is that when her mother lived through the Depression, so her mother's mindset was affected by, and I'll use the word that you've been using, that affected by that trauma that instilled these behaviors into my mother. And then they're not good or bad. Well, most of them are good in my opinion, but you know, they're not good or bad. These are just the behaviors that were instilled in her. And that's how she thinks. It's her process of belief. And I see these things that don't necessarily, you don't see them anywhere. So my mom's mentality is she's a tremendous saver. My mom's lived she's done amazing things off of the least amount of income, and it's just mind-boggling. And here I am with, you know, 4 times the amount that she makes, and yet I find myself struggling. And it's because, you know, gadgets and this and you know this, and we come across these things. And now I dropped my phone. So I got to go get a new phone.
I can't afford not to buy that.
Yeah, you know, right. You know, it's all these little knick-knacky things that we have around, and you know, my mom, she's amazed by them, but she has no use for them. When I moved in, my mom, and she spends a lot of time on the computer. She does things like, you know, Scrabble on Facebook, or whatever they call it on Facebook, Lexilus or whatever. She's into sewing, so she's part of sewing communities and art communities, and she's mentally active on the computer, as opposed to she doesn't just scroll through, you know, Instagram or Reels or whatever. And when I moved in, she was still using the same computer she'd been using for 7 or 8 years, because she had no reason to get another one. She didn't realize that, you know, it took, you know, 2 or 3 times as long for something to load, because she was using an old router and she was using an old computer. And when I got here, I was like, okay, that functions. It was, as we started organizing this condo that she originally owned, I bought it from her about 2 years ago. As we start organizing this 1-bedroom condo into more of a 2-bedroom place for both of us to live, and we organize her room, she's in her room and she's got this, you know, this little tiny 17, 19-inch monitor that is, you know, she got used, was probably first generation of its kind, just this horrible little thing. And I'm like, well, and she can't see well. She's got macular degeneration, so she's up on the screen real close. And I'm like, why don't
me?
Yeah. Why don't we get you a bigger monitor? You know, so the screen you see behind me, when I moved up here, that was my monitor. So that's a 70-inch screen that's turned on its side now. And that was up on the wall. My computer was connected to it. I could watch TV or I could switch over and do my computer work. And that's small now. So I'm on an 86-inch now. And it allows me to, when I'm online, so my browser might be this big, and then I've got my messages and all of my other stuff going. I've got 5 or 6 windows open at the same time to give me the daily information that I need for nothing. But really, it's for planning. It's for planning motorcycle routes and figuring out where I'm going next. That's what my computer does now.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
She's never needed that. She bought her car used in 2004. She bought 2004-ish. She bought a 10-year-old car that had very few miles on it, a Ford Escort. When we got rid of it last year, it had 88,000 original miles.
That's incredible.
It was a 1994. The tires on it were 18 years old. The tires, and they still were. The tread was fine. We had to replace them because the sidewalls were starting to crack and were dried out. It was more common for her to go out and not be able to start her car because she didn't drive it, and not because she couldn't drive, just because everything that she needed was here. The store's half a mile away. So if you're not lugging a 25-pound bag of potatoes back, or a gallon of milk in her case, because she's a very small woman, you can walk to the store and pick up your meds or, your daily meal or whatever, and walk back and be there and back in 30 minutes. She has always opted for the conservation of money, whether or not that is the mentality she had. She was raised in that way. She was raised in a conservative family as far as money was concerned. So everything was always put away and tucked away and invested, and she was really smart with it. I wish I had half the financial wisdom that she did. Just half of it I would be good with.
Yeah.
She could teach a master class on finance.
She really could.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, so now, Bob, here's the thing I want to leave off with, man, because I wanted to actually dedicate this video to someone we know, and we knew personally. That was Peter Paulson.
Yeah, I remember hearing a lot of good things about Pete.
Yeah, he was our maintenance guy, and if ain't nobody gonna say nothing about him, I'm gonna say something about him. You know what I'm saying? And so I want to dedicate this video to his memory. You know what I'm saying? Because he worked hard, man. And we need,
he gave a lot. He gave a lot to where we live. He did a lot of his time, a lot of his energy, a lot of his mental, wherewithal. He gave a lot to this community. And I'm just as guilty as a lot of people of being angry with him for not doing something up to certain standards. But as I reflect back, he and I had our own issues for a short period of time. But as I reflect back on it, I've never seen him do anything intentionally to hurt somebody's feelings. He has always gone out of his way to help people whenever he can.
Yeah.
Whether he did a good job or not, his intentions were always good. And I appreciate, and I'm glad that I knew him.
Yeah. Me too, man. Me too.
I wish I would have had a chance to meet him.
Yeah. Well, Shane, hey, look, me and Bob are walking buddies. You can always walk. You can always make your way up here, man. We we go early, don't we, Bob? We go about
7:30.
Now, I don't think I'd be able to survive up there this time of year, though, because how cold it is.
Yeah, it's all about layers.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all about layers.
And I'm over here still coughing. Yeah, man. All right, you guys. I really appreciate this, man. Bob, I want to thank you, man, for joining me. You know what I'm saying, getting on. And Shane, thank you, man, for trying, getting online, man. You know what I'm saying?
I'd love to do this again and hear a little bit more about your military service, Bob.
Oh,
Yeah,
anytime.
Yeah.
yeah. All right, you guys. All right. Well, thank you so much, man. Let's do it again. Like we can do it again next
Yeah.
month if you want to.
I'm down.
I'm
Okay.
down.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All
All right,
right.
peace.
Ciao. Ciao.